Hello and welcome to World Insight with me, Tian Wei, coming to you live from Beijing on CGTN. Coming up on today's program, pro-government troops in Syria have reinforced the Kurdish fighters in Afrin against a Turkish offensive. What repercussions will this battlefield alliance have on big power politics? Trump suggests arming teachers in response to the Parkland School shooting. Is a good guy with a gun enough to stop a bad guy with a gun, particularly in school? You're watching World Insight. Let's start in Syria, where pro-government popular forces entered Afrin to support Kurdish fighters against a Turkish military offensive. In response, Turkish troops escalated their air raids and shelling. Further south, pro-government forces continue to attack the rebel stronghold on the outskirts of the Syrian capital, Damascus. Situations are getting ever more intensive. Where is it heading for? Take a look at this first.
Shellings and airstrikes. These are happening in a so-called de-escalation zone. Dozens have been killed and wounded in Syria's eastern Ghouta over the past few days. Syria state media says more pro-government forces enter the northern region of Afrin to support the Kurdish militia. On the same day, Turkish forces intensified their air raids in the region. Turkish President Erdogan warned Syrian pro-government forces would pay a heavy price if they dare to support Kurdish forces. Ankara also said its offensive against Kurdish fighters in northern Syria was not over.
Turkey is testing the reactions from the Syrian government, Iran and Russia by targeting pro-Syrian government forces entering Afrin. I think Erdogan is only temporarily intensifying the situation to gain bigger bargaining chips in the future negotiations.
Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov called for dialogue between the Syrian government and the YPG. He also stressed that all interested parties should work together to prevent any attempts to deepen regional chaos.
As for the situation in Afrin and how possible it is to work towards its settlement, we've already said multiple times that any problems which now remain and even get sharper in Syria can be solved exclusively with respect to the territorial integrity of the Syrian Republic.
The UN also called for an immediate ceasefire in eastern Ghouta, and its children's agency UNICEF has expressed concern over the humanitarian situation. With renewed fighting near Damascus and the situation in Afrin, are there any prospects for a political solution to the Syrian conflict?
To find out, let's go to Tehran. We have Professor Hamed Mousawi, Professor of Political Science at the University of Tehran with us. And also joining us in Washington, D.C. in the U.S., Bülent Ali Reza, Director and Senior Associate for Turkey Project for the Center of Strategic and International Studies. Gentlemen, I want to welcome both of you with us. You are the experts in the field. Let's start with you, Professor Mousawi, the Vice Foreign Minister of Iran, talking about the fear of regional war. How far is it from reality?
Well, I mean, the developments in Syria are very worrying. In the past few months, there's been a lot of hope and expectation that a resolution of the conflict is within hand's reach, especially with the negotiations between Russia, Turkey, and Iran. Nevertheless, Turkey's offensive in the past month in northern Syria has essentially complicated negotiations. I want to point out that Turkey does have legitimate security concerns. I mean, Turkey has a Kurdish population of around 50 million, and the formation of a independent Kurdish state in northern Syria can be a threat to Turkey's national security. Nevertheless, I think we also have to acknowledge that Turkey does not really have the right to it, which still continues to be a sovereign state. So in that regard, Iran and Russia are worried. And if this situation escalates, of course, it's going to complicate negotiations further.
Right. Dr. Ali Reza, from the very beginning, a possible alliance among Russia, Turkey, and also Iran to where we are today, what have we missed?
Well, I mean, I think it's going too far to talk about an alliance. In essence, what we have is a working relationship between the three capitals, Tehran, Moscow, and Ankara. But let us remember that Iran and Russia backed Assad in the ongoing civil war, essentially allowed it to survive and to gain the upper hand, while Turkey, together initially with the Western countries, were backing the opposition forces. So I think to hear your Iranian guest talk about Turkey conducting operations in Syria as being unacceptable when Iran and Russia have been doing their best to actually participate in the civil war is, I think, somewhat ironic. Now, the Astana process that the three countries are engaged in essentially seeks to replace the moribund Geneva process that had previous backing under UN auspices, but it's essentially based on the premise that Assad will survive. And even though we're talking about the confliction zones, the escalation zones, it's still conducting operations that you referred to. And the fact that Turkey is conducting this operation in Afrin at the same time that Syria, backed by Russia and Iran, is conducting operations shows that there is a cynical kind of quid pro quo going on.
Before we talk about the cynicalness, in a way, to the other participant, let me ask you further, Dr. Alireza, about Turkey. You said very clearly in your answer that Turkey initially was supporting, together with some of the Western countries, the rebel forces, but we have seen some swaying of positions of Turkey, particularly after the Astana process. So are we seeing another change of mind from Turkey once again this time?
Not really, because in fact the forces who are fighting together with the Turkish army under the Free Syrian Army umbrella are very much linked to the opposition forces in Idlib that the Russian and Syrian air forces are bombing. And in fact, President Erdogan has said that after Afrin, Turkey will expand its operations to Idlib, presumably in support of the opposition. Now, I don't know whether he actually means that, and if he does, what will that do to his working relationship with Russia and Iran? But Turkey continues to say that Assad is illegitimate, refuses to engage in any kind of dialogue, and that's why it's so dangerous that Syrian forces, in fact, it's not just pro-Assad militias, but also mainland Syrian forces have apparently entered Afrin, which is a war zone.
All right. Professor Musawi, of course, we are talking about very different stances between Turkey and Iran, and it seems things are getting ever more driven the two countries apart. One of the most important things is the Kurdish issue you mentioned earlier, but the question is, when the Kurdish forces, fighters shall we say, inside Syria are fighting together with the government against the rebel forces, it is probably difficult for the government to say no and say you are our enemy. So in this regard, where is Iran?
I think Iran does recognize the, like I said, legitimate national security concerns of Turkey. We have to remember that Iran also does have a sizable Kurdish population within its territory. And like Turkey, Iran does not want an independent Kurdistan in northern Syria. So in that regards, Iran and Turkey actually agree on something. Nevertheless, I think Iran's position is that this issue should not be solved militarily, rather it can be negotiated. We have to remember that the Kurdish fighters in northern Syria are mainly supported, have been mainly supported by the United States. And that is a very complicating factor in all of this, because essentially their support, and they have also troops in northern Syria, has complicated this whole issue of Iran-Turkey relationship. Nevertheless, I think in the past month, Turkey has not really been able to achieve its objectives militarily. I won't say it hasn't been able to do anything, but nevertheless, I think even Turkey acknowledges the fact that there should be a political settlement to this.
Okay.
Nevertheless, like I said, the issue of the United States is going to be a complicating factor.
Got it. Dr. Alireza, you probably want to react to that. The enemy is not Iran, but rather the United States, the complicating factor.
Well, let's clarify. There are no U.S. troops in Afrin, which is now the focus for the Turkish military action. Now, Turkey has been engaged in talks with the United States about ending U.S. support for the YPG within the Syrian Democratic Forces organization. Now, I think the larger goal beyond Afrin for Turkey is to get the U.S. to actually remove its forces from at least Manbij, which is west of the Euphrates, and then, if possible, also move the YPG out of Manbij to east of the Euphrates, which is something that the U.S. and Turkey have talked about and have disagreed for some time. Now, the Russians themselves have a relationship with the Kurds. There is an office, PYD office, this is the parent organization of the YPG in Moscow. The Russians very much want to get them involved in a final peace process.
So, Dr. Alireza, you are suggesting that Turkey is having a problem both with the United States and Russia, right?
Absolutely.
All right.
Absolutely, but also...
go ahead, sir.
Go ahead.
Very briefly.
No, what I was going to say is that this operation would not have been possible for Turkey if Russia had not allowed the Turkish Air Force to actually conduct operations in Afrin before the ground troops began to move in.
All right.
The same thing happened with Euphrates Shield. So there's an arrangement with the Russians, but I think the Russians also want to make sure that the Afrin is not completely overrun by Turkey, so that the Kurds can actually cooperate with Russia in a final peace settlement.
Okay, you have demonstrated your point. Professor Musawi, Dr. Alireza is pointing to Russia now, suggesting probably that's even a bigger factor than the United States.
It's very true that the Russians are playing a very important role in Syria today. Like my colleague mentioned, Russia does have a relationship with the YPG, and also that is perhaps a complicating factor. Nevertheless, I think the difference is that the Russians want a political compromise to the situation, whereas I wouldn't necessarily agree that the Americans want that. The American support for the YPG has not only been a political relationship, they have actually armed the Kurds in northern Syria, supposedly to fight ISIS. Now that ISIS has been largely defeated, I think there should be pressure on the Americans to stop backing the Kurds militarily. Nevertheless, I think this points to the fact, and it's arguable, of whether the Americans want a political compromise to the Syrian conflict or not.
But Professor Musawi, if you said about that the ISIS has mainly been defeated, people would also question the role of Iran in Syria right now, because according to your vice foreign minister, the role of Iran is to defeat ISIS. Otherwise, the ISIS would come into Damascus and some of the other places of Iran, so places of Syria rather. So, Professor Musawi.
I think if we have to if we want to speak accurately, we have to acknowledge the fact that ISIS has been largely defeated. I'm not denying that there's no pocket of ISIS presence in Syria. Nevertheless, they are no longer a meaningful presence. Of course, we have other groups such as Al-Nusra Front, which is Al-Qaeda in Syria, so groups, dangerous terrorist groups such as that. But I think the issue of ISIS has been largely eliminated, and I think the excuse of arming the Kurds so that they defeat ISIS is no longer valid, and I think the Americans should, based on that fact, should no longer arm them.
Okay, here's the thing, gentlemen. We are coming almost to the end of this debate, but the most important thing is, are we still having the original goal, as all sides have reached a consensus in a way, that is The original goal is to get rid of ISIS as soon as possible from Syria and the other places surrounding. Well, at the same time, Assad will be the next issue to be discussed, even though there are different opinions. Dr. Ali Reza, which stage are we at now?
Well, the U.S. goal, as you say, was very much focused on getting rid of ISIS. Now they're trying to construct a new strategy which will involve the Syrian Kurdish forces and somehow work out a relationship with Turkey for the post-ISIS future of Syria. Nonetheless, the U.S. has not accepted the Russian and Iranian position, which is that Assad will survive, the Assad regime will continue, and the opposition, which they have helped the Syrian government defeat, must accept this.
What about Turkey?
Until that is resolved.
What about Turkey? That is the most important thing.
Turkey also
Direct answer.
rejects. Well, Turkey is cooperating with Russia and Iran, but it still does not accept that Assad should continue. And that's the premise on which Astana is built.
Professor Moussaoui, where are we at? What is the end goal here?
I think, reaching a political compromise is going to be very difficult. Now, nevertheless, I would also like to point out that I think the key player here is going to be Turkey. In the past few months, there's been a sort of a rapprochement between Iran and Russia on the one hand and Turkey on the other. I think if Turkey is able to reach a compromise regarding the Kurds with Iran and Russia, then that would actually pave the way for a larger settlement regarding all of Syria. Nevertheless, the Americans are not really on the same page, either with the Iranians or Russians, or with the Turks for that matter.
Things are ever more complicated, particularly recently. But thank you so much for both of you with us, even though you have very different opinions toward the same issue. Hamed Moussaoui, Bulent Ali Reza. Gentlemen, thank you so much for being with us. Really appreciate it. You're watching World Insight with me, Tian Wei. Still to come on our program. Trump suggests arming teachers in schools in response to the Parkland School shooting. Will this latest tragedy finally change the tide in the gun control debate? Welcome back. You're still watching World Insight with me, Tian Wei, coming to you live on CGTN. 17 people were killed in a school shooting in Parkland, Florida on February the 14th. One of the bravest victims impressed the whole country. 15-year-old Peter Wang died a hero, taking bullets while saving others. Loved ones remember him fondly.
The young hero died wearing the Junior Reserve Officers Training Corps uniform he treasured and holding the door so other students could escape from the bullets.
He was possibly one of the kindest person I've ever met. I've always said that. Like, out of our group of friends or family, he was the nicest. He would also always offer his help and everything. I don't know what to say.
The community had filed a petition request with the White House to allow Wang to have a military funeral. The U.S. Army awarded Peter with a posthumous medal for his heroism. In another recognition of his valor, the U.S. Military Academy at West Point posthumously admitted Peter to the class of 2025. That was one of his dreams, attending the prestigious military university.
Peter's a hero. He sacrificed his life to save other students' lives, and that's what I'm going to say that's my example of a hero, to give his life for somebody else. Probably a lot of those students he didn't even know.
Including Peter Wang, 17 people were killed in the school shooting. A 19-year-old gunman opened fire with a semi-automatic rifle at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida on Valentine's Day. The gunman has been identified as Nicolas Cruz. He was previously a student at the school and was expelled for disciplinary reasons. Tears mingled with anger. Too many lives lost.
I don't want any mom, any parent to have to go through this ever again, never again. And my son went to that school. He was in another building during the shooting. Thank God he made it out alive. But the students want this to be the last mass shooting ever.
Enough is enough! Enough is enough!
U.S. President Donald Trump promised strong background checks and mental health screenings for gun buyers after meeting with survivors and affected families on Wednesday. However, Many believe politicians are not acting to tighten gun regulations because they receive significant campaign contributions from America's powerful gun lobby. President Trump also suggested the possibility of arming teachers to protect students.
A teacher would have a concealed gun on them. They'd go for special training, and they would be there, and you would no longer have a gun-free zone.
Gun or no gun, that is the question.
So what is the steep price paid for heroism in the age of mass shooting? And where is the debate of gun control in the United States going from here? Joining us, three panelists. Gao Zhikai here in Beijing, current affairs commentator. Joining us in Austin, Texas, we have Rick Dunham, co-director, Global Business Journalism Program at Tsinghua University. He's originally a Washingtonian working in various media organizations there. In Washington, D.C., we have Christopher Chambers, author and professor of journalism at Georgetown University. Gentlemen, welcome to the program. I want to start with you, Rick Dunham. Your students are almost the same age as Peter Wang, the Chinese-American kid who died while trying to protect the other students from being shot by the guns. Tell us about your reaction to the death of this young man and the heroism he has demonstrated in any way will lead the debate about gun control in the United States to somewhere else.
Well, I think he's an example. I mean, all of the students at Stoneman High School, both the victims as symbols and the survivors and the families, have just changed the gun control debate in a way that I've never seen. I mean, I have covered mass shootings, like the shooting in Connecticut a few years ago, and people were talking about how there would be change. I see change coming now. It may not come this year, but I think that this is the shooting that made change inevitable. And I think with Peter Wang, that one of the things that it may do is change perceptions of Chinese Americans and immigrant families, because he is not the stereotypical Chinese immigrant. He's not the stereotypical immigrant in the midst of a very heated debate on immigration that's going on. So I think it could affect things more than just even the gun control debate.
Professor Chambers, do you believe so? I mean, you've been working on topics together with your students in Georgetown University about the issue. Has this debate going, be able to seek in any other direction that we have already seen, the tragic political one?
It's going to be very difficult. What my students and I are seeing, especially with the backdrop of the CPAC conference, the conservative conference here in Washington, is that the response is more telling than what the students are doing. Basically, the response, they've basically split into good cop, bad cop mode. What that means is you have people like the president who are saying, well, I could back more expensive background checks, and then on the other side, you see their allies who are going after the students and are claiming that they're being paid, or they are, communists, or they are not serious, or they don't know anything, or they're dupes. So there's this kind of bilateral response going on. The problem is the responses that the president is offering are things that are common sense and could have been put in place a long time ago, and that the Republicans, either on a state level or in Congress, refuse to fund. Refuse to pay for.
The political debate about gun control in the United States, we have learned for quite a few years already. Let's take a look at what the students are saying. Students in the U.S. Capitol walked out of school and took part in protests outside the White House on Wednesday, demanding gun control legislation. Listen to protesters, their concerns.
The New Year's comes and you're just like, you just know there's going to be another shooting, there's going to be more victims, there's going to be more tears. So whenever I'm in school, I'm afraid that, what if this is the last time? What if this is the last time that I get to see my parents?
People were telling me today they didn't want to come to the march because they were afraid they were going to get shot here. But the brutal truth is that We're not safe in our own schools. There are threats coming in. We're all scared. We should have never reached this point. This is America. We deserve to feel safe, and it's as simple as that.
Well, this is the students talking. Victor, listening to their voices, and while remembering the dirty dogfights that the two other panelists are talking about in Washington, D.C. taking place, are we seeing any hope at the end of the tunnel at all?
I hope there will be hope for us to see. However, I'm more pessimistic this time, mainly because gun-related violence is a deep-rooted problem in the United States, and there are many, many forces in the United States which actually do not want to put stop to this gun violence, actually, and therefore the debate will continue. Meantime, I think more lives may be lost, and this is really a tragedy, and the United States really need to push for a very heated political process to take place so that there will be enough control of the guns.
There are not lack of heated political debates for now, I mean, for years, but the question is the solution the one to go? For example, President Trump, Mr. Dunham, had proposed to arm the teachers in schools in order to do that. Is that going to be the solution according to you?
No, not at all. I think that's a non-starter in the debate. If anything, that's an attempt to deflect from the serious debate. I mean, I teach at Tsinghua. China has very strict gun control, but if I taught in the United States right now, I can't imagine carrying a semi-automatic or an automatic weapon into my classroom to protect my students in case some insane person who had legally purchased a gun came in. I think that's an attempt by the gun lobby both to scare people so they buy, but also to deflect the debate from serious common sense gun control, which is what we really need to be talking about. We don't need to be talking about these, run down these rabbit trails.
Professor Chambers, to you as well. Is this going to be the solution, particularly when you heard about the dirty political fights back in the election season between Hillary Clinton and also Donald Trump, in which Trump, 2016, he said, Hillary Clinton said, I'm going to arm the teachers as a solution of gun control. I'm not going to do that. He said, that's wrong. But he is exactly saying what he said today.
Well, he does that a lot. He tends to flip a lot depending on what the base of his supporters want to do. And a lot of them couch this in terms of a cultural issue and an absolute right to firearms. And we have 300 million of them in the United States. Many of them are these military assault rifles, and there's really no difference between an AR-15 that's semi-automatic and one that's automatic. It's just one that goes pop, pop, pop versus one that goes brrr. And even our own soldiers will say that they will switch to semi-auto because it's more accurate. So, I mean, you know, these are basically military rifles out on the streets, or people are using them to hunt squirrels, and you know, and things like that. I mean, you know, but his base sees that as an absolute right and almost a cultural badge, and they do not want to give that up. And he's going to basically say what they want to hear. You know, it's just that he has refrained from attacking the students. They have other people who are doing that.
Professor Chambers.
So that's why I said there's this good cop, bad cop.
Professor Chambers, at the same time, midterm election is coming. So, well, at the same time, the president wants to affirm its political base, but it also wants to make sure that the Republican Party will have a good face and a good image when it comes to midterm election. The question is, where does that image come from, and how is it related to this topic of gun control? Professor Chambers, help us to understand.
Well, it's a battle that's going on now. The CPAC conference in Washington that started today of all conservatives in the United States. The president is going to be speaking there this weekend. There is a battle going on right now. They do not know really how to respond to this. They want to be able to energize their base. They also want to be able to say, well, these people are going to come and take away all your guns, but at the same time, you're right. They want to have a good image. And they've seen the parents and students shame other Republican politicians on national television. So it's a real battle right now. Several conservative commentators have been stricken from some of the speaking panels at this conference for attacking the students. So, you know, there's a real problem, and I
right.
think that they're going to try to work that out. But, you know, who knows what will happen?
Mr. Gao, here in Beijing, we see and we witness those political fights for years, and things have not been solved. But there could be other incidents like this for the months leading to the midterm election. God bless, we do not want those to happen, but there could be the chance. So the question is, if these kinds of incidents continue to happen, is there going to be any so-called made-up solutions or suggestions by some of those supporting the guns, including the current president sitting in the White House, that would help people to understand that they have the intention of solving the problem?
I think ever since this very tragic mass shooting in this Florida high school, there have been many proposals and many ideas being aired and discussed in the United States. But I don't think any of these proposals or ideas are sufficient to address this fundamental problem of gun-related violence in the United States. And I think much more need to happen, and the United States really need to see the fundamental danger and the risks of the gun-related violence and all the lives lost for no reason at all. And the United States need to come up with a more fundamental solution to this gun-related violence. Otherwise, very unfortunately, more innocent lives most likely will be lost.
We've seen one incident after another. Professor Chambers, among your students, how are they seeing all of these incidents? Of course, I understand that those students coming from Georgetown might be pretty much Democrats or leaning toward that direction. But this is not just a political debate. This is about lives.
Yeah, I mean, and a lot of them come from very conservative families and conservative states, but they seem to have a more common sense attitude towards this than even, say, their parents who might be very conservative. I mean, they do see a need or a right, a constitutional right, or even a need to have perhaps a handgun for personal protection in the home. But beyond that, I have not talked to any, including many who have conceal and carry permits back at home, where if their home state, who are for having semi-automatic rifles and other kinds of these implements and an unlimited supply of them. They don't feel safe. They don't feel that this reflects on the United States as a nation. I mean, they really do think that the outside world probably looks at us as barbarians or cowboys, and that's not a positive thing. And I think the young people want to reflect that back, because a lot of them feel they have nothing to lose. But
the question is, Professor Chambers, how is that related? It's related going to be on the elections. As I understand, local elections are already taking place. So Republicans and Democrats are fighting state by state for some of the most important seats. So will that issue have a big impact on the election result? That is the thing. And whether the youth vote that we are talking about here is likely to make an impact for the midterm election, that is going to be the key thing.
Yes, it is. And what you're going to see is a battle of the bases, of the Republican base coming out because they're scared that all their guns will be taken away, and this new kind of groundswell youth vote. We'll have to see who can take advantage of that. It's not necessarily a Democratic Party apparatus sort of thing. It would have to be grassroots individuals and independent organizations. There's going to be marches all over the country at the end of March. One in Washington. A lot of celebrities will be here. We'll see if this can congeal into something organized, and I think you'll see the students do that now because they want to be heard. The younger ones who can't vote yet are definitely going to be pushing their older brothers and sisters, and we'll see what will happen there. I mean, will the Republican Party be able to scare enough of their base to come out and vote just on this single issue? you know, that is going to be that's going to be the deciding factor.
Well, we are talking about this piece of news. Of course, we heard a lot of voices coming from the young people, the students who are protesting against guns, the voices that are against guns in the United States. But Mr. Gao, we do not want to forget that during many election seasons over the past few years, we have seen some tendency that even though some opinions and ideas have been advocated by the media strongly and used repeatedly, eventually it is not going to have a huge impact on the election result and therefore not likely to be part of the renewed policies. Will that include the gun control issue as well? Mr. Gao, your analysis here.
Very unfortunately, I think that most likely will be the case. The huge debate right now going on in the United States probably will last for a few days or a couple of weeks, and then it will calm down without achieving a fundamental solution to the gun-related violence. And violence will continue, and more lives will be lost. At the midterm election, there will be many, many huge issues that the Americans need to argue about, debate, and come to a solution, for example. And this most likely will include gun-related violence, but gun-related violence most likely will remain untackled for many weeks or months or years to come. This is the tragedy for the American nation.
We do not want to see those tragedies in the United States, particularly the tragedies of Peter Wang, this young man, 15-year-old Chinese-American, trying to protect his fellow students from the guns. But, you know, Professor Chambers, for those who are coming from that high school, Parkland, the students and their parents, what would be the solution for them? How could they be able to resolve what they have seen, to seek for a closure? That is a big question mark, and we're going to see many of those question marks for months and probably years ahead.
Well, yes, I mean, that's a multi-level response. Some of it is psychological and emotional, and they'll be scarred forever. Some of it is, you know, as they get older and they have other responsibilities, will they be able to carry this forward? A lot of them are trying to go to college. A lot of them might be starting families in the future. How are they going to deal with that? And then there's the structural aspect. I think what you might find is that a lot of these kids will force the issue in some of the local elections. Maybe not in a place like Florida where Republicans can control the State House, but in other areas that might happen. And then what will happen is the kids will be able to shift the matter to the courts, because then the courts will have to decide, can a state have more regulation than on a federal level, and then you'll see that, you know, who's on these courts, who will be making these decisions. I think really these kids are working through their grief positively, and I think that's the one bright spot that America can show the world, is that our children are stepping up where our adults have failed. And I think that's the one thing that Americans can hold their heads proudly on, where they cannot hold their heads proudly on this other aspects of this, is that these young people are stepping forward.
All right. Mr. Gao, we also see Peter Wang, for example, setting a great example for fellow students. Chinese Americans are usually being labeled as not necessarily in the mainstream, usually take care of themselves, not necessarily looking around, but certainly the case of Peter Wang has been demonstrating that kind of stereotype is totally wrong.
Peter Wang is a hero, and I think he is highly being respected by the Americans, and it is very touching for me to see the U.S. military has decided to give him a military funeral and has granted a mission to Peter Wang, now already passing away posthumously, to the military academy. I think people need to draw inspiration from the heroic deeds of Peter Wang, and we'll know that Peter Wang has not died in vain, and the Americans, the adults in particular, need to resolve to come up with a solution to the gun-related violence. Here in China, we also have huge admiration for Peter Wang. I think he's an American, but we also hail him as a Chinese-American hero. We really highly respect him.
The most important thing, we hope that Peter Wang will not die in vain. That is the most important thing. I want to thank you, both of you, for being with us for today. Victor Gao and Christopher Chambers, of course, earlier, Rick Dunham as well. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for being with us. And that is all the time we have for today. If you'd like to see more, try to find us, World Insight, CGTN, into your search engine, or check out our YouTube channel. You can also follow us on Twitter, Facebook, Sina Weibo. From me, Tian Wei, and everyone on the World Insight team, thanks for watching. Tune in again next time for insights across China and around the world. Good night.